What is the connection between diabetes and COVID-19 or the coronavirus? Are masks, sanitizers, and even the all-awaited vaccines the answer to saving us all? Or is there something else the experts are completely missing? After today's episode, you will, for the first time, feel like you're in total control of the virus, not the virus in control of you. New discoveries of COVID will be explained along with life-saving tips that will mitigate the severity if you are ever infected. Hi, I'm Jay Sampat. If you are new to this channel, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that gray notification bell. That way you'll be alerted when new life-changing episodes have been published. And if you learned something new today, please smash that like button. As with all my videos, this should not be considered personal medical advice. This is my interpretation of the latest research. If you want medical advice, please always consult your physician. Today, I will explain why I, even in the highest risk group as a type 1 diabetic, am not too worried about COVID. And you're going to want to share this video with loved ones, diabetic or not, because it is relevant to everybody. COVID-19 can infect people of all ages, but 80% or more of cases are mild with minimal flu-like symptoms. Those who do test positive show no symptoms or even very mild symptoms, more like the common cold. The majority of people who have caught the virus have not needed to be hospitalized for supportive care. However, in up to 15% of cases, COVID-19 has been severe, and in around 5% of cases, it has led to critical illness. The vast majority, around 98% of people who have been infected to date, have survived. Are we as diabetics more likely to get COVID than the general population? No, we are not. However, we are at much greater risk for more severe outcomes based on what we've been learning so far through research studies. What we now know, patients with diabetes tend to have more severe reactions and very poor recovery abilities that end up with greater deaths. Mortality seems to be about 3-fold higher in people with diabetes compared to the general mortality of COVID-19. Besides us diabetics, the elderly, people with pre-existing medical conditions such as heart disease, asthma, high blood pressure appear just as vulnerable to becoming ill with this unique virus. It does not matter if you believe COVID-19 is a mutated natural virus or was designed in a lab as a weapon. It attacks man's greatest weakness or kink in our defense mechanisms. And there appears to be a strong common link to all of these pre-existing health concerns. Firstly, when the immune system is compromised, it makes it harder to fight the virus and leads to longer recovery abilities. And second, this is key. The virus thrives in an environment of elevated inflammation, insulin, and blood glucose levels. Does that sound familiar? I'll attempt to answer the million-dollar question. Why do some people have mild, even no symptoms, and others have severe complications to this virus? And why do children who get sick all the time from, say, the common flu, but for the most part are very immune to this virus? If you remember, more than 1 in 3 here in the United States is pre-diabetic. But in the episode, the most powerful weight loss tool, which I will put a link in the description box below, we discuss the unknown and, in my humble opinion, one of the single most important diabetic research out there, Dr. Joseph Kraft. Who was he? Dr. Joseph Kraft was a medical doctor who measured over 14,000 oral glucose tolerance tests in his lifetime. This is the standard test to measure blood glucose response to a set amount of glucose over 2 hours. The main and critical difference is He measured the response over 5 hours, but most importantly, he included the corresponding blood insulin levels too. What he found out was that people with normal oral glucose tolerance tests may still have abnormal insulin responses. Those who responded with excessive secretions of insulin to his 75 grams of glucose test were at very high risk of eventually developing chronic diseases as well. Kraft noted one important point. 83% of subjects failed his test. All of those who had vascular disease also had hyperinsulinemia or high circulating insulin levels, thus high body inflammation. Most healthcare professionals fail to recognize how insulin and high blood glucose levels play pivotal roles that lay at the root causes of many chronic diseases. High blood pressure, cancer, dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and now I'm officially adding COVID-19 to that list. We know those of us with diabetes have impaired immune systems due to the high inflammation levels, which affect the body's ability to heal from illness and disease quickly. There are markers in the blood that can measure inflammation. One is called a C-reactive protein. Clinically, they are seeing a direct correlation with patients who have severe COVID-19 complications to higher markers of inflammation. These same markers also seem to be higher in patients who have poorly controlled diabetes. Studies now clearly show patients with well-controlled diabetes who have been hospitalized with COVID-19 have higher rates of survival. So then why are we seeing an increasingly younger subset of patients coming in along with Hispanic and Black patients being disproportionately affected? It's all related to lifestyle, diet, and blood sugar control, thus hyperinsulinemia. The more one lives in the city or the inner city, the more processed foods, junk food, and carbohydrates one eats, thus the higher levels of blood sugars and insulin levels and corresponding inflammation the body has to primarily deal with. The body cannot fight two battles at the same time. On the one front, it's dealing with chronic inflammation. On the secondary front, it has to respond to this new virus. Here is what the experts now state based on the latest research, and I am going to disagree with some of the details. They state that if your glucose control is really good, an A1C around 7, your risk of severity is no higher than anybody else in the community. But if your glucose control is not good, and they state a hemoglobin A1C like an 8.5 or 9 or higher, where the average blood glucose sugars are above 200, then you're at risk of getting severe complications of the coronavirus. I do not think an A1C of 7 is good at all. This is my personal opinion. Even as a type 1 insulin-dependent diabetic, I try and pin my A1C in the low 5s or the upper 4s. Now, if you remember, children as a whole seem to have a pass on this virus, but not all. The question is, why? Can we first start with this basic question? If the virus requires high insulin and blood sugars, then where do children's blood sugars run? Well, it's in the 60s and 70s. Not the hundreds or the 120s, the low 70s. If elementary children are eating whole, unprocessed foods and are highly active, running around and playing, then it's in the 60s. I'll repeat that, the 60s. And during this lockdown, are children active and playing, or are they sitting around the house all day eating more carbohydrate-based junk foods, and even worse, continually snacking, which then increases blood sugars and insulin levels? In other words, are we doing them more harm than good keeping them locked down? I have a 7-year-old, and I can see the damage it's doing to him right now. As one gets older and activity and lean muscle tissue reserves begin to diminish, insulin resistance begins due to the overchronic consumption of carbohydrates. Blood sugars start to rise, insulin levels start to rise, and one develops hyperinsulinemia. Are you starting to see all the links? As mentioned, this virus goes right after that fault or kink in our lifestyles, a diet high and rich in carbohydrates. In order for it to survive and replicate, the virus binds to what's known as ACE2 receptors. They trigger changes in glucose metabolism that worsens pre-existing diabetes, or even worse, causes straight diabetes to develop for the very first time. There are a lot of ACE2 receptors on the beta cells of the pancreas. These are the cells that produce insulin, which are critical for controlling blood sugar. When the virus goes after these cells, they then stop making insulin, which makes sugar worse. Advantage then goes to COVID-19. Checkmate, game over. We've all heard of the drug hydroxychloroquine. How is that involved? Hydroxychloroquine was invented actually in 1934 and simply works by blocking processes in the cell that adds sugars to proteins. It does the opposite of what high blood sugars do. This theoretically impedes the virus from interacting with receptors, modulating the inflammatory response to the virus. So now, let's talk about some of the complications to be aware of that can save your life. For one, by the time of hospitalization, many are intubated, which means they end up on tube feeding. This physical trauma to the body could easily lead to further stress-induced hyperglycemia. In other words, it adds to high blood sugars. And here's where things may get worse. Unstable food intake and the use of glucocorticoids, also known as catabolic steroids, in patients with respiratory problems just compounds the blood sugar problems. So here are my tips to prevent you from becoming hospitalized in the first place. First and foremost, the single most important thing any one of us with diabetes can do is manage our conditions carefully. Keep that blood sugar in that non-diabetic range as much as possible. Think children's blood sugars, not an A1C of a 6 or 7 or 8 or even worse, a 9. And I will pound the table on this. If your doctor is unable or unwilling to help you get that A1C into that non-diabetic range, I would insist you start following another fellow diabetic, the gold standard of doctors, Dr. Bernstein. And I'll put a link in the description box to his question and answer seminars. Second, you're going to want to avoid the foods that cause high bodily inflammation. And we've discussed those in detail. That virus would thrive in a diet full of breads, grains, cereals, gluten-based foods, highly refined and packaged foods high in carbohydrates, and especially the vegetable oils. Stay away from these foods. Third is exercise. Yes, as we get older and insulin resistance begins to accumulate, blood sugars rise, and it's the exercise that helps with sensitivity. And again, during this lockdown, what are we doing? Just the opposite of what is needed. We're sitting at home, not only exercising less, but we're eating and snacking more. If you're having a problem controlling your blood sugars, also talk to your doctor about metformin. We all know how powerful metformin can be at lowering glucose levels and increasing bodily sensitivity. And you're not going to believe this. The big shocker. Some doctors are actually halting metformin therapy in people hospitalized with this disease because of concerns of a very rare side effect, ketoacidosis. And again, in my opinion, this is a grave and fatal mistake. In May 2020, the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, researchers documented the outcomes of 283 people hospitalized for COVID-19 in Wuhan, China. All of those had diabetes. The analysis included 104 participants who were taking metformin and 179 patients who were not taking this drug. Only 2.9% of the participants on metformin died during their hospital stay, compared to 12.3% of those who did not take metformin. So, metformin may also be the other unknown key for survival. If you are unfortunately hospitalized, I want you to be aware of the other single biggest hurdle you are going to face. And it blows my mind how utterly blinded and aware the experts are. If keeping our blood sugars are our number one priority, then what are they going to feed you in the hospitals? Hospital food will be your biggest enemy. It's a death sentence. You will get 3 high carbohydrate based, highly refined diet of grains, cereals, bread-based meals, and even more sugar-filled snacks in between all of those meals. Everything that virus will need to take you out. Adding more and more insulin or any other drug to cover all those carbs will not be the answer. That is like adding gasoline to a fire. You must take control of what is fed to you and ask immediately for a low-carb option. If they do not provide you with one, have your family members bring you foods from home. And what would that be? Each low-carb meal has to have a good serving of lean protein to help preserve all that muscle tissue you're going to need during that sickness. Your carbs will come from above ground, non-starchy cruciferous vegetables. And I'll repeat that, above ground, non-starchy cruciferous vegetables, dark green and brightly covered vegetables, so that you get all the antioxidants, the vitamins, the minerals your body will need to fight this virus. The same diet I eat day in and day out to maintain myself even during this secondary lockdown here in California, and that includes my gyms too. And yes, I'm still finding a way to exercise and train to keep my blood sugars flat and extremely well controlled. That is why this virus has not scared or controlled my life from day one. I'll create a playlist with more videos on diabetes, life expectancy, and diseases. You will learn the direct correlations between diabetes and high blood pressure, diabetes and cancer, and even how our A1C influences our standard of living. If you're on your desktop or laptop, I want you to use your mouse to click this upcoming box. If you're on your mobile device, tap that with your fingers. The first is the link to subscribe to this all-important channel. The second is the link to that all-important playlist. So, have a great and productive day, and we'll see you soon with another new episode, which are generally released weekly. Bye for now.